have to await that fine print. But I want to bring in Professor Singh also. And before I get into the other details of what really is going to be the road ahead as far as the relationship between these Quad countries is concerned, what we're also picking up by the means of sources and senior officials telling us that one interesting aspect of that closed-door meeting with Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden was that the US President Joe Biden, apart from his prepared remarks, actually had a spontaneous comment for the Prime Minister himself where he lauded India's efforts for its vaccine Maitri and COVID distribution as well. I want to understand your assessment, what this essentially means as far as relationships between both the leaders and the countries are concerned, and what does it signify?
Thank you for having me on your program. I think the most significant reason of President Joe Biden being generous to Indian Prime Minister is because that is where his challenge lies. You saw in his multiple comments that his preoccupation with Ukraine is what makes India, lying at certain variance and insisting on that being the position of India. And increasingly, of course, all these countries have begun to understand that India would not be falling in line with the American way, but will pursue its own national interests. And that has particularly been facilitated because all other countries, particularly European countries, also have had variations in terms of not literally towing the American line.
Correct.
The most significant thing you need to note here is that in the joint statement of Quad leaders issued about a few hours back, word Ukraine does not appear in that statement. That is the kind of influence I think that India's position has brought about to what is the joint statement being issued. And in that sense, India becomes increasingly assertive, and I think almost the accepted version of India is being showcased in how Quad leaders are looking at it. And in that sense, I think that kind of generosity is understood. But I also want to underline that President Joe Biden has, over a period of time, earned a certain kind of notoriety to make comments without meaning them. And this is not the only comment. His comments on Taiwan, his comments on removing President Putin. So I would take it with a pinch of salt as to how far one should really, take these things. But overall, I understand his need to placate India, to keep nudging India, knowing fully well that nothing much is going to come about.
Interesting comment that the professor is repeat the same in Taiwan. But Professor Singh, I want to bring you in here, and I also want to understand, this is what we heard from the takeaways of the bilateral as well, that one of the key aspects that were discussed were the ongoing war as well. If you just recap a little bit in time, when the war had just broken out, there was a lot of pressure from the West and India to toe a more quote-unquote aggressive line. But India had its own reasons, a long-standing relationship with Russia, and to be fair, it was not easy to be towing or to walk that tightrope walk for India as well. From then to now, how do you think the ongoing war factors in as far as the relationship between both the countries is concerned?
Thank you for asking that question, because very often the stereotype image of India's neutrality is completely misunderstood and caricatured. India's neutrality is very, very complex in that sense of focusing on death and destruction on the ground, protecting Indian citizens first, then supplying humanitarian assistance to people on the ground, but at the same time, not condemning Russia. It's a nuanced policy. Second, that policy has evolved over a period of time. It began by saying, we are concerned about it. Then we moved to deploring, then regretting, then talking about sovereignty needs to be respected, territorial integrity needs to be protected. We also then went on to say there needs to be an independent investigation in what was happening in Bucha. So it has evolved over a period of time, depending on what has gone on the ground. So instead of being swayed by either of the major powers, either Russia or United States, India has very carefully pursued its own traditional non-alignment driven kind of stance here, but has become increasingly proactive and therefore influential player in how that is viewed. And in all meetings related to Quad, India has repeatedly said that when we sit in Quad, let us not bring in Ukraine far too much into focus, because here focus has to be on Indo-Pacific. Okay. And I'm delighted to see the United States statement of leaders, the word Ukraine does not even appear in that. And that's a stamp of India. Second, very quickly, is a stamp or a full paragraph on terrorism, terrorism financing, cross-border terrorism, and all these issues. A full paragraph is devoted. I think I see a bit of a stamp on it.
Okay. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave that conversation there. I'd like to thank our guests for